everyone at this point, and when I name your municipality, if the voting member present could please state their name. Ulster County.
Ed Pine.
City of Kingston.
John Schulteis.
Town of Saugerties.
Leanne Thornton.
And Vernon Benjamin, you're here as well. Town of Ulster. New York State Department of Transportation.
Sandra Jobson.
New York State Thruway Authority.
Lizzie Phillip.
Village of Saugerties. Town of Rosendale.
Yep, I'm here.
Town of Lloyd.
Ed Pizzuto.
Town of Plattekill.
Tom Wilkin.
Village of Ellenville. Town of New Paltz.
Neil Batez.
Town of Woodstock.
Bill McKenna.
Town of Rochester. That's 10 members present. That's a strong quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Call for citizens' comments. Do we have any citizens' comments? Okay. Approval of the June 16th, 2020 Policy Committee meeting summary. Can I have a vote for discussion purposes, please?
Wilkin, so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkin. Do I have a second?
Second, Fred.
Thank you, Fred. I have a motion and a second. Any comments or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So carried. Next item is approval of July 21st, 2020 Policy Committee meeting summary. Do I have a motion for discussion purposes?
Wilkin, so moved.
Second,
Thank you, Mr. Wilkin. Do I have a second?
second, Fred.
Thank you again, Fred. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So carried. Item number 4, communications and announcements. Brian?
I have no major communications or announcements at this point in time. We are still awaiting word for a transportation alternatives program funding announcement from the New York State DOT. The last I heard, that will go out in the fall, so it's still fall. So we'll still keep our ears open. And same for Bridge New York from the New York State DOT. There should be an application for those funds coming up soon. And also at the conclusion or near the end of this meeting, David will be giving an overview of the UCTC bridge funds that are available. We do have $2 million in funding left over from the last TIP build that we will be releasing to Ulster County members. And those are off-system bridge funds. And we'll talk about that more at the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Brian. Does any of the council members have any communications or announcements they wish to share? Hearing none. New business. Item A, Resolution 2020-17, support for the New York State Department of Transportation, NYSDOT, targets for safety performance measures. Do I have a motion for discussion purposes?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Bill. Do I have a second?
Wilkin, second.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkin. I have a motion and second. Brian?
Yes, during the October UCTC Technical Committee meeting, David and I presented the latest targets for safety, which is a requirement by the FHWA that NPOs pass performance management targets across a variety of different categories. The safety target is required to be updated annually by metropolitan planning organizations. The requirement came into effect in 2015 through the previous Transportation Authorization Act, and it's been carried through the current transportation authorization. MPOs are required to either pass their own safety targets for their respective planning areas, or they have the option to adopt the statewide target prepared by the New York State Department of Transportation. New York State DOT has been working very closely with the 14 MPOs statewide, and to date, I believe all of the MPOs have chosen to opt and pass the state target, which is a statewide target addressing the 5 performance areas. MPOs have 180 days to pass that target after NISDOT approves it through their Highway Safety Improvement Program. That program was approved on August 31st, 2020. So we are within that time period to approve this target. The target deals with 3 different major categories: the number and rate of fatalities, serious injuries, and also bike and pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries. We take a 5-year history. These are 2021 targets, and that 5-year history is for the period 2014 through 2018. So each year when we pass the new target, we drop the oldest year, which in this case would 2013 data is dropped, and we add the latest year, which is 2018 data. We have a 5-year history, which allows us to smooth the trend line so that any anomalies or jumps in data don't have a major effect on the trend line. And the other reason why we have that's the other reason why we have a fatality rate, which considers the amount of vehicle miles traveled in the state in order to adjust and smooth out the trend line across these categories. So finally, the safety performance measure, like all the other performance measures, is an attempt and motivation by Congress and by the Federal Highway and Transit Administrations to encourage the State Department of Transportations and MPOs to make sure that our federal transportation expenditures are tied directly to performance and improvements in the system. That's the reason why we're doing performance management, and that's one of the reasons why we're passing this resolution today. That's it. If there are any questions, we're happy to try to answer them.
I have a question. The safety measures deal exclusively with fatalities, and I have no problem with that. But I think that it is demonstrated that in some instances, the frequency of minor accidents are such that some type of a button or a click should kick in to raise that to a higher level of attention. And I don't know that there is that in our system, or if this is the venue for doing that. I know that it was worked out over a period of years in the situation in Saugerties, but I wish that there was a better model to follow in terms of connecting the state DOT issues with the local experiences of fire departments, things like that.
Yeah, and I thank you, Vernon, for your comment. I will say that this, of course, is a national performance measure that we're passing today. So it's a very broad brush approach to try to encourage states and MPOs to have their transportation dollars follow where the problems are. To the point that you raised, it really, I think, is incumbent upon individual MPOs working with their region Department of Transportation offices to really focus down on the fine-tune efforts and issues that may be occurring within the planning areas. And I believe we're doing that through our individual corridor studies, and also, as we mentioned before, through the rural road safety efforts that David Stoss in our office has been working on. So your comment is certainly noted, and I think the MPO has a lot of ability to really begin to focus on some of those local issues, and will continue to do so.
Thank you.
So just a quick other response, Vernon, is it doesn't just focus on fatalities. It also focuses on serious injuries as well. So there's serious injuries in here, and they're both and it also includes fatalities and serious injuries for non-motorized as well. So you see those numbers in the forecast. So the moving average forecast, this is a conservative forecast by NISDOT. The moving average forecast is, you can see the numbers minus 7.8% when they take that trend line forward. And then NISDOT has capped those at minus 2%. So you can see the difference between what they expect versus what their cap rate, what their cap rate is. If they use the simple moving average and move that forward. Yeah, I also would say that when the Transportation Council does studies, one of the things that we do look at with respect to our intersection studies or our corridor studies is looking at the segments and looking at them as whether or not they have accident rates higher than the state average for the particular type of road that it is. So we try to capture that issue that you raised, Vernon, when we do our studies, to make sure we're looking at not just fatalities, but also looking at sections of roadways that have higher accidents than normal relative to the statewide average. Anything else?
I would say that this is a great opportunity to mention the County Road Safety Action Plan, where we're going through and calculating out crash rates across all segments of roads within Ulster County, as well as intersection crash rates. And we're identifying top 10 locations and different treatments for those, as well as looking at systemic improvements that we can do throughout the system to reduce the overrepresented crashes that we do see. And that's kind of a newer undertaking from the MPO. So we'll be looking forward to those results to guide some of our safety work going forward.
Any other comments? So excuse me, before I forgot myself when I was asking for people to approve resolutions, I'm just going to ask if there's anybody opposed. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Herb, you had something to say?
No.
Okay. Any abstentions? Hearing none, so carried.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is item B, Connect Mid-Hudson Transit Study. It's a presentation of the project findings by our consultant, Foursquare. And Boris Palchik is here to do that presentation. Good morning, Boris. How are you?
Sorry, I was muted. Good morning. I am going to try to share my screen. So 1 second. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Okay. Excellent, great. So so what we're going to do today is provide an overview of the key findings and recommendations of the Connect Mid-Hudson Regional Transit Plan, which is a study we've been working on for really a couple of years now. And so just to begin, I want to give a little bit of background for anyone who hasn't been following along, or just as a review. So the study focused on identifying opportunities to improve transit connections between the 3 county study areas, so Orange, Dutchess, and Ulster counties, as well as between the study area and major employment hubs outside the region, so New York City and Albany. The key areas of analysis in the study included taking a look at the effectiveness of the existing regional services, reviewing the service performance and customer satisfaction monitoring process, opportunities for new technology and service models, and then capital improvements that could alleviate corridor congestion and capacity constraints at park and rides. So the recommendations that we will be talking about today do reflect the pandemic-related changes to travel patterns that clearly, we can't avoid acknowledging those. The impacts of the pandemic are that travel patterns have really changed quite a bit since we started the study a couple of years ago. By April of 2020, most transit operators in the region were either suspended or had significantly reduced their service. Many of them, most of them really did start coming back online in around June of 2020. But every agency and every system has come online at a different pace. Some are almost completely back up to speed, like UCAT in Ulster County. Others are still really at a fraction of their service. In September of 2020, just to give you kind of a sense of really the impact on travel patterns in the region, Metro North ridership in September 2020 was down 75% compared to September the year prior. And Metro North is, a really good kind of proxy measure for commuting patterns in this region. So that's something we want to note. And that's still the case. The ridership is still significantly down. The data that we collected for the study occurred before the pandemic, however, and it's still, I think, useful data because we believe that in the long term, commuting patterns will probably more resemble the past patterns versus the current patterns, but with lower volumes overall for quite some time. The big difference kind of going forward that we think may be the case is it's the role of Stewart Airport really might change. It's already changed during the pandemic. It may continue to sort of have a different role in the region going forward. And the shift really involves moving away from being a passenger gateway to New York City and more toward being a key cargo hub for the region. And in terms of travel patterns, what that means is probably more intra-regional job access trips. So people heading to jobs at Stewart being a bigger component of travel to the airport versus trips to and from New York City. So I think that's kind of the way that we see things going forward. As far as the approach to the study itself, there were three key data sets that we took into consideration to familiarize ourselves with the service in the region. One was a market analysis to understand, what does the market say. Two is the service analysis, where we looked at the service as it is on the ground today. And the third component is outreach from key stakeholders. So all those three things together helped us understand kind of the key issues in the region. So I'll start with just a little bit about the public outreach. There was a public survey that we did early on in the study in the winter of 2018. We publicized that through press releases, and we had 12 pop-up events around the region where we went to park and rides, where we went to universities, and so on, and told people that the survey was available online. We had a pretty good response rate. Almost 1,300 surveys were submitted. 75% of those were riders. 24 were non-riders. I guess I should say 25 if you round up, but the survey itself helped our team understand how area commuters interact with existing services and helped us kind of highlight some of the key concerns that they had. But this group was a self-selected group because the survey was done online. So it's not like a census where we go door to door. So, we can't say there was necessarily a representative sample of all riders or all commuters because it was a self-selected group of participants. Nevertheless, some of the issues that came up in the survey, we'll kind of go through by category. So regional connections was something that came up numerous times. So we heard from survey takers that connections in Poughkeepsie were fairly good to Metro North trains, but not that great for connections between local services like UCAT to Dutchess County Public Transit. Those connections were not well timed. We heard also in terms of regional rail connections, the issue wasn't so much timing, it was more access in terms of parking availability. So parking challenges at Rhinecliff and Poughkeepsie train stations limited folks' access to regional rail service. As far as passenger amenities, we heard about the New Paltz Park and Ride shelter. People told us that it was insufficient for the amount of traffic, the amount of ridership and commuters that go through New Paltz Park and Ride, and they requested a more robust shelter with better kind of climate control and so on. And then as far as service gaps go, so we heard about the UCAT KS route. It's not a very frequent service in general, but during the midday, there's a 90-minute gap in service between Kingston and Saugerties. So people did mention that. Also from Wallkill residents, we heard that there is no current service to Wallkill and a desire to see some service in the future. And then Ulster Avenue, this one is somewhat of an obsolete issue now because at the time UCAT and City Bus were still separate entities, and so UCAT riders were complaining about closed door service along Ulster Avenue, which was an area that was served by City Bus. Now that's really not an issue anymore, but that came up in the survey as well. Okay, so that was what we heard from stakeholders. Then when we started doing the analysis of the market, the one thing we found was the top commuting destinations for Ulster County residents were within the county itself. So 45% of commuting trips are internal to the county. These kind of trips are best served by local transit services like UCAT versus regional providers like Trailways. When we look at local service, however, the key to success for local type service is density. So the more people and jobs there are per acre, the better local transit service tends to perform. We looked at something we call transit potential, which is a measure of an area's population and employment density. And as a rule of thumb, we like to see 5 people or jobs per acre in order to support fixed route service. In Ulster County, the urban areas, so Kingston, New Paltz, Saugerties, they have the highest transit potential. There are, so on the map, you kind of see areas that are yellow, orange, and red. Those are areas that do have the 5 people or jobs per acre, and then areas that are green or gray lack that density. Some smaller clusters of transit supported density can be found in Wallkill, Ellenville, and Woodstock. So when we look at regional service, density, while it's somewhat important, it's not nearly as important as for local service. For regional service, what's really important is that the service is designed to meet commuters' pain points. So pain points include traffic congestion, parking costs, travel time, things like that. When we looked at Ulster County, all the major regional commuting patterns, so we define major as 500 trips per day, at least, between municipalities. So that could be from New Paltz to Poughkeepsie, or from New Paltz to Manhattan. Those are what we called major trips. So we found that in Ulster County, at least, all of the major trip patterns were actually served fairly well. In other words, they had direct connections and fairly frequent service, hourly or better, during peak periods. However, there still are some pain points that kind of still need to be addressed. So while commuting by transit allows Ulster County residents to avoid the stresses and the pain points I mentioned, and for example, parking in New York City, there are other pain points that might drive people away. So for example, poor on-time performance. If people try a commuter service and it's not reliable, they won't come back again. They'll try it once or twice, and then they'll try to find other options. Similarly, limited parking availability. We heard earlier from the passenger survey that some rail stations have limited parking, which is what drives people to look for other options, including bus service for their commuting needs. So there are some congestion hotspots in Ulster County, or at least there were pre-COVID. New York Route 32 at the I-587 terminus. We know that NYSDOT's actually currently working on a roundabout at that intersection to improve the congestion and the throughput. The other congestion hotspot we identified was the New York Route 299 at the I-87 interchange. As far as capacity constraints at park and rides, so we heard about the Rosendale park and ride. Again, this is all pre-COVID, so but I'm gonna kind of mention it anyway. Also, the New Paltz park and ride, the New York State Thruway park and ride at New Paltz. So another service issue that's sort of unique to this area is, first of all, to identify the service issues that I mentioned earlier, those pain points, poor on-time performance, and so on, requires regular monitoring of the service and regular investigation of customer complaints. But in the Mid-Hudson region, you have kind of this fairly unique situation where you have private operators. Many times you have, in other parts of the country, you have commuter services that are publicly operated or publicly overseen, even if it's a private contract. But in the Mid-Hudson region, you have a lot of private carriers that receive operating assistance through STOA, which is a statewide mass transportation operating assistance program. And they do submit some ridership and service statistics reports, but generally those are not detailed enough to really evaluate the service effectiveness or customer satisfaction. So it's sort of this kind of gray area where these private operators are kind of policing themselves in a way when it comes to customer service, customer satisfaction, things like on-time performance. So those are some of the key issues that we found, and now we'll kind of switch gears and go to recommendations, where we have come up with recommendations to address those kind of issues. So the first one actually addresses the last issue that I noted, which is that these private operators that are publicly subsidized kind of operate and almost police themselves in a way. So the recommendation that we've come up with is what's called a transit ombudsman position. So a transit ombudsman is a public advocate charged with representing the interests of consumers or taxpayers by investigating complaints related to publicly funded services such as transit. So publicly subsidized private operators are overseen today by NISDOT. That goes without question, but the agency itself isn't really structured to provide the type of robust oversight of things like customer complaints that probably needs to be happening given the amount of commuter service that is being provided by these private operators. So as I said, the operators are largely policing themselves. So there are examples around the country and in other countries as well. This public transit ombudsman is from Australia. The Victoria State in Australia has an office that is specifically designed to provide oversight just on transit services. In Washington State, in the Seattle area, King County also has an office of ombudsman. They have several ombudsman positions within that office that are assigned to different areas of focus, like transit, like land use, and so on. So there are some examples to look at. In addition to serving as an advocate for commuters, though, the transit ombudsman could take on some additional roles in the area. For example, they could be responsible for service monitoring and reporting, including on-time performance and parking ride utilization. These things happen now, but they're happening not with a whole lot of frequency. So it would be useful to have someone who has kind of a regular, recurring review of on-time performance and parking ride utilization to really capture trends as they happen. The ombudsman could also be a resource for service planning and mobility management, providing reports to the TMA on trends that emerge, and even being, in the role of coordinating with, let's say, new companies that want to set up in the region, and they're asking what are all the transit options for my employees and so on. That could be a role of the ombudsman as well. So that's one recommendation. The next is related to passenger information and mobile payment. So the transit agencies, nationally, transit agencies kind of pioneered the development of transit-specific apps to allow users to plan trips and track vehicles from their own devices. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these apps around the country that different agencies developed on their own. But in recent years, the trend in the industry is moving away from that approach to one where third-party, basically transit operators make their data available open source, and they rely on third-party developers to take the lead in developing the apps, maintaining the apps, and so on. So this allows the transit operators themselves to focus on their core service areas, on operating the service itself, even on data management, to make sure that the data that goes out there, the open source data that goes out there, is updated, accurate, and so on. But several large agencies, including Baltimore, Boston, LA, Montreal, they've all suspended the development of their own in-house apps, and they're focusing entirely just on maintaining the open source data. There's three there's three apps that have kind of emerged as the largest players in the industry in this third-party transit app kind of world. One is called just Transit, one is called Move It, and one is called Citymapper. The key benefits of these apps, the third-party apps, is that they really do allow for multimodal planning. They typically don't include just one system, which is the case when you have the transit operator itself developing the app. These apps allow people to see multiple transit systems that may be operating in their area, including non-transit options like scooters, microtransit, Uber and Lyft, those kind of things, all in one place. So it simplifies multimodal trip planning. And it also increasingly includes in-app features like mobile fare payment. And to participate in these apps, you can be a very passive participant, which means that you can make your what's called GTFS feed, that's General Transit Feed Specification, which is what goes into Google Maps and things like that. You can make that available open source and then do nothing else. And if you do that, then these apps will sort of automatically pull data into them for others to use. Or you can have a more formal relationship with these apps, which is required to have some of the additional features like mobile payment, because you have to have agreements on sort of behind the scenes how you transfer the payments from the app to the agency and so on. So this does require regional coordination. This may be a more longer term aim because some of the agencies have recently signed contracts with app developers that focus just on their unique system. So it may take a few years for those contracts to expire, but ultimately it would be good to have sort of this regional approach to this, maybe overseen by the ombudsman position we mentioned previously. I know that there's been a lot so far. Maybe I should take a pause to see if there's any questions before I continue. Okay.
Thanks, Boris. Does anybody have any questions? Vernon?
Yes, we're going to talk about climate change. The
Oh,
rollout of the CLCPA is happening this year, and the Transportation Advisory Panel is going through a whole number of changes on what to do about public transportation as well as private.
well, we'll be talking about this service recommendations in a minute. So with service recommendations, if you can make the service more appealing to riders, you can increase the transit mode share, which is a win for on the climate change side as well.
I have the opinion that, or the feeling that we're doing pretty well as far as reaching disadvantaged communities and tying them in with major employment areas. I think that that's true, and also in our community, which doesn't quite have that, but has a lot of like disadvantaged people who live around the community, are being treated well. But the outreach to the rural areas suggests that improvements could be done there, and may be related to improvements in the actual transit vehicles in terms of storage capacity and ability to reach out to a wider geographic area.
Yeah,
That's a great segue.
Exactly,
Great
perfect
point.
segue to the next segment. So, all right, so let's talk about service. So one of the recommendations that we really did zero in on, especially post-COVID, is a service called microtransit service. So microtransit is a technology-driven demand response service that allows riders to directly request vehicles in real time through a smartphone app or by phone. It's a very versatile solution that can provide both local coverage and regional first last mile connections. So on the local coverage side, that's getting people from their homes to shops, to medical facilities, to job access. And then on the regional first last mile connection, that is talking about complementing the regional investments, whether it's rail service or commuter bus service, getting people that first last mile connection. Once they get into your county, how do they get to their final destination? And this is an application that can be used in rural, lower density areas, as well as in areas that are more urban, but fixed route service isn't necessarily working for other reasons like poor pedestrian environment and so on, which makes it difficult for people to get to bus stops from bus stops and so on. So it's a technology that is similar in terms of its user interface to Uber and Lyft. So a lot of people are already familiar with how it works, but unlike Uber and Lyft, it uses a set fleet of vehicles. So it gives you more control of the service branding, the vetting of the drivers, the training of the drivers. These pictures on the right are from a service in Albany that launched about a year ago called Flex by CDTA. So this is the app that they use where you can see where the vehicles are at any given time, and you can request the vehicle. This is what the vehicles look like. And the pilot program that they launched has a defined zone. It's not citywide, at least not yet. It has a defined zone, and it's a zone that is difficult to serve with fixed route transit service because of the pedestrian environment, because of the density. So that's where they chose to launch it. Speaking of vehicles, as Mr. Benjamin mentioned, the types of vehicles that are typically used for microtransit service are smaller than your typical transit vehicle. They're vans, sometimes even minivans. So they're right-sized either for lower density environments, kind of in rural areas, or just currently because of lower travel demand for COVID-19, they're a bit, maybe more appropriately sized until ridership volumes increase. So we identified several opportunities in all three of the study areas, the study area counties. We'll focus here on Ulster County, But the zones that we did identify they reflect the findings of the market analysis as well as the service analysis and stakeholder input. The zone boundaries that we defined up to now, they're kind of preliminary and flexible. They could change over time as kind of more study before implementation. And additional zones may be considered as well. If the first few that we kind of saw as the best candidates in the immediate future, if those work out, you could expand this to other zones. So I'll kind of go through and give some brief overviews of the zones. So the first one is the Southern Ulster County Microtransit Zone. That's the 9W corridor south of Highland. This could restore service to the communities of Marlborough, Milton, and Highland that were previously served by the KPL route. That service was discontinued in March 2020 because of COVID, but even without COVID, this is a pretty low density environment. So fixed route service may never have really been the best option for it. Microtrans is probably a much better fit. It would also provide a link to Poughkeepsie. So people could make that kind of regional first mile, last mile connection to Metro North Railroad or to local service in Dutchess County. So that's the Southern Ulster County zone. The next one is the Ulster County US 209 microtransit zone. That's over here. That would provide service to the communities of Ellenville, Neponuk, I'm going to butcher this one, I'm sorry, Corhongson, if I'm not mistaken, Accord, Stone Ridge, and SUNY Ulster. So this would provide better frequency and coverage than is currently provided by UCAT on the UE route. And the route itself, the UE route, could continue to exist, but it could potentially be truncated at SUNY Ulster. So the college becomes kind of a transit hub. And if you truncate a route, the UE route, for example, it could then provide more frequent service in the corridor where it remains because it's a shorter route, and then provide for connections to the microtransit service after that. The next zone is the Woodstock area zone. So that would be so the UCAT Z route currently provides service from Kingston to Bel-Air Mountain, but in order to serve Woodstock, it does have to do sort of a time-consuming deviation along Route 375. So this could provide both better local coverage in Woodstock, Bearsville, Xena, and West Hurley, and also allow for the Z route to be streamlined on its way out to Bel-Air Mountain. Then the last one that is fully in Ulster County is the Northern Ulster County Microtransit Zone. So that's the 9W corridor again, but this time kind of from Saugerties to the Mall area. This would serve the communities of Saugerties, Malden, Glasgow, and Lake Katrine. It would address the limited frequency on the UCAT KS route. That's one of the routes that I mentioned earlier from the passenger survey where people said there's a big gap in service during the midday. So this could provide more on-demand service all day and provide better coverage in these communities. And then the last one I want to note, it's actually mostly in Dutchess County, but the reason it's of note is that it does have a connection across the Kingston Rhinecliff Bridge to Hudson Valley Mall. So this could provide, once people get to Hudson Valley Mall in Ulster County, this could provide a connection to the Rhinecliff Amtrak station, for example, or to Bard College. So this, although it's in Dutchess County, is I think of interest to Ulster County as well. So those are the zones that we preliminarily recommended for Ulster County. Of course, it could be expanded in the future to areas like Wallkill. Wallkill is, we heard from the passenger survey that there's a desire for service there. Fixed route service may not make sense. So if microtransit works out,
why not? I'm sorry, Boris. Why not consider expanding the Orange County zone that looks like the Middletown Newburgh zone up into Wallkill?
So the main reason is we were trying to be sort of conscious of how these will be paid for. So we tried to limit them to the extent possible to make it simpler to pay for them sort of county by county without having too much overlap. There's the one exception was the Dutchess County one, because it's just sort of like a point connection just at the mall versus like providing broad coverage in more than one county. So it was sort of a decision just based on simplicity of funding, at least in the short term. But in the long term, yeah, I think that would make sense.
And the same thing with respect to the southern Ulster zone. Why not move it down and right down into Newburgh?
That
Cross
could be
that
as
over right down into Newburgh.
right. So it's that one there. There's also the consideration of size of the zone. So in order to provide sort of competitive wait times, in other words, from the time a person makes a reservation to when they're picked up, you have to take two things into consideration: the size of the zone and the number of vehicles that are assigned to that zone. Microtransit works best when you have more than one vehicle operating concurrently, because then you can use an algorithm that determines which vehicle gets assigned to which trip request. However, if you have a zone that becomes too large, then you have to have 4 or 5 vehicles assigned to it, and then the cost does start to increase. And so you have to find the right balance between the zone size and the cost of the service and the pickup time. So, over time, eventually these could merge into county-wide, regional-wide. You would just have to be willing and able to fund the larger service, the zone sizes.
Boris, this is Sandra from New York State DOT. This is a great presentation, but I'm just curious, why did Dutchess County not see a lot of proposed micro transit zones?
Well, Dutchess County they do have their Dutchess County Public Transit Service that is, operating in a lot of the areas. UCAT also is local, but Ulster County has kind of a different, UCAT operates more as a regional type service, and the frequencies really reflect that. Like UCAT has more routes that are operating very limited frequencies, and in those cases, microtransit may be a better fit than having a service that runs every 2 hours or service that has a 90-minute gap. So that's kind of the main difference.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question.
Sure.
So the microtransit zones, does this imply the buses will be done away with, or they will be on a more lessened route?
So yeah, that's a question really of funding, because just if I can go back to the example in Albany, what they did when they launched their pilot study, they kept their fixed route service in place because they wanted to do a real life kind of let people vote with their feet. They wanted to see how people respond to microtransit as an option. And so there actually are fixed routes that operate concurrent, overlapping with the microtransit service, but their aim was eventually to start cutting back those local routes because they anticipated that the microtransit model would be more appealing to riders. I haven't checked back with CDTA after their pilot's been in place, I think, for about a year now, maybe a bit over a year now. So it's worth checking back to see what happened to the fixed route service. But to operate both is really an issue of funding. It's difficult it's difficult enough to find sufficient funding to operate fixed route service at sufficient frequency to attract choice riders. Operating both microtransit and fixed route is even more challenging with the limited funding.
Okay, I wanted to just point out that the climate stuff talked about by the transportation panel included, I guess, that side issues and interest in improving safety and comfort for the transit travelers, and the flex vans seem to accomplish that.
Yeah, and they're also designed to complement the fixed routes that do well, that do have reasonably high productivity. And so again, in the example of Woodstock, you do have fixed route service in the 28 corridor. The question is, does it make sense to take that service and deviate it up to the 375 corridor when instead you could just streamline the fixed route service and then have the microtransit work as a feeder to the fixed route service? So in some cases they work together, and then in some cases it replaces fixed route service.
Of course, with respect to Ulster, you would assume that the activity center to activity center fixed route service would continue inside the microzones, and the microzones, I would presume, would essentially provide service to destination interior to the zone.
They would provide service interior to the zone, but in some cases, for example, for example, the KS route, which is, wait, actually, let me see if I got this one right. we talked about connecting at SUNY Ulster. I guess that's the UE
Gotcha.
route actually. So in that case, you wouldn't necessarily need to continue running fixed route service all the way to Ellenville. Instead, you could have a microtransit service there and allow people to connect at SUNY Ulster to fixed route service if they needed to go beyond that. Every
Okay.
zone is also designed to encompass key destinations that people need in their daily lives. So getting people to grocery stores, getting people to medical facilities, educational facilities. The intent is for each zone to sort of be self-sufficient, but then also to provide connections to regional service to get to other destinations. All right. So then moving on to kind of some capital recommendations. So I want to kind of introduce the concept of transit signal prioritization, which many of you have probably already heard about. It's a practice of providing transit vehicles with priority at signalized intersections to reduce travel time and improve reliability. It works in a couple of different ways. If a bus approaches a signal when it's already in the red phase, it can shorten the red phase and allow for an early green. On the other hand, if a bus is approaching during a green cycle, it can extend the green to allow the bus to squeeze through before the red begins. There's two ways of doing TSP. One is called passive TSP and one is called active TSP. Active TSP is this, what I just described. Passive TSP is really just adjusting phase times based on time of day. So if you have a predominant traffic flow during the peak period, you give that direction of service longer green times during the evening peak, and then maybe the opposite in the morning. So it's not dynamic, it's more just like a timed changes in phasing. Active TSP, which is the one that actually is dynamic, it's a really quickly evolving technology. The goal in the next few years is to use what's called visual identification of vehicle types. So that's kind of the AI newest kind of hype in technology, where you have cameras that can identify, okay, this is a transit vehicle versus a beer truck, and the transit vehicle will get signal prioritization, the beer truck would not. That's still an evolving technology. At the moment, though, active TSP requires transponders. So transponders on vehicles as well as transponders at the signal. There are a few applications for active TSP in Ulster County. The New York Route 299 at I-87 interchange. This is an area that has heavy congestion, or at least it did before COVID, between 5 and 6 p.m. The congestion mostly impacts Route 299. That's what you can see here in this picture. Trailways buses serve a park and ride, which is located right around here, east of I-87, with 27 northbound trips and 26 southbound trips for a total of 53 weekday trips. The area is also served by UCAS NPL route. So the proposed improvement would include active TSP at the Route 299 and I-87 interchange to permit signal preemption for transit buses at the intersection. NYSDOT is actually doing a lot of intersection improvements along 299. Some of it may already be done. I think it's still in progress in some cases at Chestnut Street, Manheim Boulevard, Cherry Hill Road, and Putt Corners Road. We understand that what NYSDOT is currently doing is making all signal improvements be TSP ready. So that doesn't mean that they necessarily have TSP. What it means is that the signal boxes that they're installing, the hardware they're installing, can be very quickly upgraded to TSP technology. It's sort of a plug and play type thing. You can plug in into the signal controller box an additional kind of chip device that allows it to become a TSP compatible signal. So we're recommending coordinating with NYSDOT at these intersections to implement TSP when it becomes viable to do from a funding standpoint. Then as far as park and ride capacity goes, the Rosendale Park and Ride, this is a lot that's served by Trailways and has currently 59 spaces. That's the area right here. Prior to COVID, parking utilization was near capacity on a nearly daily basis. So the lot itself could be expanded in two phases. The first phase could add 67 spaces to the existing lot. The second phase could add a second lot with 132 spaces. The phases do require acquisition of property. And we understand from NISDOT that there have been prior unsuccessful attempts to acquire property in the vicinity of this park and ride. But it's something maybe, post-COVID to try again. There's also the possibility that there may be some environmental impacts because of wetland areas or possible wetland areas east of the lots. So this would require additional study, an impact study, before this can proceed. So the lots could actually be expanded in phases. Now with COVID, it's probably not likely that you would need to have both of them, constructed right away. You could have sort of a phased approach where you first build out one and then move on to the next. Any questions about these capital recommendations? Okay. Sorry, there's one more. So the New York State Thruway Park and Ride in New Paltz, that's another one that is a fairly large one with 149 spaces. It was also near capacity on a regular basis. There is an opportunity to expand, although again, this one has some sensitive land use that needs to be investigated further to make sure there's no impact to wetlands. This is also the area where we heard from passengers in the surveys that they would like an upgrade of the shelter that's right here in the picture to allow for a larger and climate-controlled facility. So those are the park and ride expansion recommendations. And the last thing I want to mention is that this presentation will be given to the public on December 10th at 6 p.m. We're going to be doing a Zoom public meeting. So it'll actually include discussion of all 3 county recommendations, not just Ulster County. The meeting will be recorded and then posted on the project website, which is Connect Mid-Hudson, on December 11th, along with a kind of a comment form that people can fill out after they either attend the live meeting or watch the recorded version of the meeting on December 11th. So this is a Zoom meeting. I'm sure Brian will send everybody an email about this. So Tom, I see Tom, you have a question.
Yeah, going back to the micro transit on page 18 map that you had questions about on like getting Wallkill, different ways of possibly doing that. Has anyone done a study to see where the people in Wallkill want to go for destination? Because I'm in between Plattekill and Wallkill. I go to Orange County. Most people in Shawangunk go to Orange County. I mean, in the past, yeah, the Wallkill to New Paltz bus, I know some people who were county employees that rode that. But to me, I would think most of the people in Wallkill who would be using it might want to use a micro transit to go to Walden at a Hannaford there to go shopping, or possibly up to Medina would be the other way, or to Pine Bush. That's for shopping. That would be where they go. But quite often, a lot of things are tied into Newburgh around Plattekill and Shawangunk or Middletown. And I don't come up to Kingston too much. I don't go to I go to New Paltz some, but not too much. Just a minute. I have a phone call coming, and I'll stop it as I can.
So Tom, you want to?
So
you with us again, Tom?
Yeah, I just had a landline was ringing, and I was trying to shut it down. But I'm just saying I would do a study on the Wallkill area to see where the destinations is, to see where you're going to hook it up. Because 100 years ago, this whole area went to Newburgh, and it was the trolley car went to Newburgh to Walden, and then they took the Wallkill Valley up up to Gardner and even, I mean, in my area up near the prison where the prison is where there was the New Hurley, stop, and people who came to New Hurley from Newburgh or came up the river to Newburgh took the trolley to Walden and then up that way. So I'm saying Wallkill and Plattekill are tied more into Newburgh or Middletown or Montgomery than they are to Ulster County.
It's
And
a
that
good
would-
All right, Tom.
observation. And I would just say, Tom, bear in mind that the nature of this study is very much regional in its approach, and it's a little broader. I think if and when we get to a point where we identify the need to begin implementation of microtransit service, we would need a finer grained market analysis to answer precisely the question that you raised. Where do people want to go?
Because there's no-
Specifically by zone.
Because there's no sense in connecting it to New Paltz if there isn't much
Yeah,
of a demand there.
I mean, that's actually why one of the reasons the Wallkill was not included in these zones, because if you notice, most of the other zones have kind of a contiguous market within the county of multiple communities that can be,
Right.
tied together. Wallkill doesn't so much in Ulster County. You're right, it does crossing the county line. The reason that this zone was drawn the way it is because Orange County they have a service called Transit Orange that is almost like in name only. It's really just a branding exercise, and all the services provided by Coach USA. But Coach USA has cut back substantially, especially everything that's not going to New York City. And so a lot of the communities like Walden, Montgomery, and all those, they are currently without service at all.
Well, Walden and Montgomery had a Walden Montgomery bus, a microbus kind of that was used to, I don't know, they used to have it. I don't know if they still do, but it was called the Montgomery Walden bus or something like that. And so, I mean, they had like little regional microbuses that did the runs.
Right.
So Tom, we got where you're coming from. I think from my perspective, looking at this, I think, Boris, we'd like you to give you a sense that these microtransit zones perhaps should not be restricted. If we're doing a regional study, one would presume that we don't restrict these microtransit zones if they're logical connections across county lines.
Okay. Yep.
I'll just leave it at that. I think I appreciate where you were coming from with respect to the difficulty in terms of coordinating and funding, but I think the region is beyond. If we can solve a transit ombudsman that works across the region, we should be able to solve transit activities across the region as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Anything else, Boris?
No, that's it. So just if you have any constituents or anybody else that's interested, please let them know that there will be this meeting December 10th. And Brian, maybe you could send out this link to everybody later.
Yeah, we're just waiting till after the holiday to send it, because I think people might be a little tuned out right now, and I think early next week we'll get this out there.
Okay, great, thanks.
So
I wanted
Boris,
to
I know you may not be. Go ahead.
This is Saja Ahmed. I'm the Ulster County Area Transit Director. I started in this role back in December, and I haven't had the chance to come to UCTC meetings much lately because of the pandemic, but I just wanted to address the group and let you all know that we had a lot of these plans to kind of start working on some of these initiatives, and especially to kind of publicize our service, because that's one of the group of feedback that we hear all the time, is that people don't know or have a good understanding of the UCAT system across the county. But we had to curtail a lot of those initiatives when COVID began, to keep our drivers safe, and as we learn more about how this spread. So kind of we are just getting back into our full service, and we're still facing some COVID related challenges, but you know, looking at microtransit and looking at loops and looking at contracting with third-party contractors like Uber, Lyft, and one that we were specifically looking at for Ellenville was Via, was something that was being worked on, and we're hoping to pick that back up as we kind of resume some level of normalcy. Now, overall, our ridership is still down 75%, kind of similar to MTA. We just ran the numbers for October. So, and you know, there are a lot of challenges to come with the second wave of COVID, but I'm gonna knock on my desk because none of our employees have contracted it, and we've kept our passengers overall safe. So, but I welcome, I've had the pleasure of working with Supervisor Betez over the past year to work on the new pulse loop system, but I'll drop my email in the chat. So if any of the town supervisors or town representatives have questions or concerns that they want to bring directly to me, please do so.
Yeah, and VIA is one of the
Thanks, Sasha.
primary microtransit operators in the country. So for everybody's I'm sure familiar with Uber and Lyft, but VIA, you guys may not be familiar with them, but that's who they are. So it's interesting. It's good to hear you guys are working with them.
Yeah, and we also have outreach from Circuit as well, which is a non-traditional transit operator that relies on advertising as well as subsidies from the public sector as well. Boris, can you just talk briefly? I know you did quite a bit of analysis, and I think the council should at least be aware of it on funding available for transit. Can you just talk briefly about that funding analysis?
Sure. You know, I actually just lost electricity in my apartment. So can you guys still see my, I'm working just off of the battery on my computer, but I can't see the presentation anymore. Hold on.
So just briefly in terms of how you went about it and what's out there and how the current funding
okay, so
it's distributed.
Okay, so the full implementation of all of the recommendations we came up with would require 113.6 million in funding over the next 10 years. That's not available currently to the region based on the existing funding sources. The recommendations that we came up with kind of come up to a total of about 25 million worth of capital and operating recommendations, and they would kind of rely on some of the unallocated TMA funds. There's funds that have been flowing into the region for some time that still have not been kind of programmed or assigned. So those are the unallocated TMA funds. So we recommended creating a regional transit fund that's managed by the TMA or by a TMA committee, and potentially even overseen by the ombudsman position to help kind of formalize the distribution of the unallocated TMA funds. So that was kind of the key recommendation that we came up with to really create like a body that could have a process with maybe competitive grant allocations of the unallocated funds, just to provide more of a formal process to the TMA fund distribution.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council members? Thanks, Boris. Much appreciated.
Okay, great.
Good luck with your electric, by the way.
Yeah, I'm going to drop off now, if that's okay, and try to get that figured out, because my son is supposed to be doing third grade classes and he just lost electricity. So, all right, thanks guys.
Again.
Okay, bye.
So again, item number 6, other old business. Brian?
Yeah, and David, if you could bring the agenda back up. I think Rec Connect is listed there. I would again just remind members to check out the Rec Connect online resource through the county for information on access to regional trails and other public park type amenities. The UPWP call for projects is open. It's on our website. If you go to the UPWP page on the drop-down menu, there's an application form. If you're interested in applying for a planning project or study in your municipality, give me a call, send me an email, let me know. The application is pretty straightforward and shouldn't be too complicated. David, do you want to say a little bit about off-system bridge funds?
Sure.
Can I do before you do, David? Let me just go back to the planning call for projects. I would just urge council members in terms of looking at projects to try to ground those project requests back into the various studies that the Transportation Council has done over the years to make sure we have some relevance relative to what we're doing as it relates to what our studies have asked us or told us to point to do. That's the first thing. The second thing is, remember, we just went through some performance work with respect to NISDOT and with respect to safety. And we want to make sure that the studies that we do, that we move from a regional safety study, which David is going to talk about a little bit. We want to make sure that if we move that way, we want to move into looking at safety issues associated with some perhaps local studies that are necessary. Thank you. David?
Yeah, so going back to the off-system bridge call, we do have on the TIP program some funding for off-system bridges, I believe in the amount of a little over $2 million. And this funding can only be used on bridges that are not on the federal aid system. So we're looking at bridges that there are a number of local bridges, a lot of county-owned bridges. It's about 240 some odd bridges within Ulster County that these funds can be used on. And we're following a similar application process to the Bridge New York program. So if you've ever filled out for Bridge New York in the past, the application is basically lifted straight from that, just with some additional adjustments to the criteria. So the current application, as we have it set up, this is basically it here. You basically put in your bridge identification number, BIN. If you need help identifying that, we can definitely look up the bridge for you. And once you put it in, then it will auto-populate through and bring up information about, the traffic that's on there, the percentage of trucks, the traffic that's seen, and as well as condition information. And big one that we're looking at is this local bridge priority index, which in the past DOT has created as part of Bridge New York program. We've adjusted it to meet our local needs and with as current of information as we have available. And this is used to help us prioritize the applications as they come in. There's a narrative sheet where you're going through the project scope and, the components that you're going to be needed to address within there. And I believe that we're looking for element specific as we have in the past, just due to the availability of funds. $2 million is, a little over that is the entirety of the program. And, you'll often see bridges go over that amount. So we're really trying to limit it down to specific components of a bridge. But if you do have a need on an off-system bridge, by all means apply, and we can adjust from there. So we're going to be looking for this application to come out shortly, I imagine after the Thanksgiving break. But we have finished out with the index, and we have the prioritization details listed as part of the narrative of the application. Is there anything else that we wanted to add into that, Brian?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you.
I would just say that if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to David directly with any questions that you may have. I would hope that we would find some takers for these funds. We have one of the largest numbers of off-system bridges in Ulster County in the region. And so if we don't use it, I'm sad to say that local governments are maybe ending up paying their own money rather than being able to use federal money for these things. And we can certainly give you deficient bridges as well, based on our most recent reports that we have from NISDOT in terms of those bridges that have significant problems. Right, David? We could do that?
Yeah, there has been a little bit of shift in the bridge condition reporting. But yes, we can provide that information.
And I'd just like to remind everyone, this is a 20% local share is required, 80% federal, 20% local.
Thank you.
Dennis, this is
Somebody was saying
Sandra.
something. Hi, Sandra.
Yeah, how are you? Another project to think about, I know everyone immediately goes to, let's do a bridge replacement, and those are much needed, but another project type to think about, and, maybe the county DPW could think about doing something like this countywide for a bigger number of bridges is, keeping them well painted and washed is always a good thing to do too. So, maybe somebody wants to think about doing a countywide painting contract or something. I'm just throwing another idea out there.
Are
so
those
people
eligible
aren't-
for off-system bridge funding?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
the
as
tip
long as
doesn't
you're,
describe it that way.
Well,
Well, we
it's,
can-
but that's, yeah, and sorry to interrupt, Senator. The MPO has put an emphasis on element-specific work. That is our local decision. The federal funds, however, as Sandra is saying, are perfectly eligible for those uses. So if some.
So painting would be element specific.
Right.
Sandra, anything else?
oh, that was it. Just wanted people to think a little bit beyond, full replacement. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
That's a great suggestion. Appreciate that. Very much appreciate that. Anything else on bridges? Hearing none. LRTP graphic design, Brian?
Yeah, we're nearly done with that contract. It was a relatively small and short contract, and they are diligently working away on reformatting our long-range plan, and we should have a draft out probably within the next 4 weeks, I would hope. And we're working through that. We have our new logo has been finished, and they're also working on a design template for our all of our reporting documentation going forward. The new report format will be used. So I have sort of been sitting on this new logo for a little bit, and I think we should do a full issuance of it and redo all of our letterheads and stuff like that at the beginning of 2021 and roll it out at that point in time. So you'll be seeing it soon.
Thank you, Brian. Anything else, Brian? Any other
No,
old
just to
business?
let folks know that right now we don't have any agenda items or need for a December meeting. So at this point in time, unless something changes, we will be essentially canceling the December meeting, using that time to begin the preparation of our new Unified Planning Work Program, which we'll then present to the council members at a January 21 technical committee meeting.
Any other business from the council members?
Dennis, one more item I wanted to mention, the county road safety action plan. I would encourage members, if you have any safety concerns or please to take some time to review the top locations that have been identified within the county. We have issued mailings. We did a recent one for planning board members as well. Basically, we've gone through and identified the top 50 intersections and road segments within the county, and we're looking for feedback on those locations through an online mapping tool where you can basically go through and let us know if the location makes sense and if there's any kind of improvement that you feel would work there specifically. We're going to be taking those recommendations into account when we identify those, finalize those top locations and look for treatments moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions, statements from council members?
And the last thing is that we'll put Boris's presentation on the project website.
All right, thank you, everybody, for joining today. Everybody enjoy your Thanksgiving. Stay safe and well.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you
Stay safe
too.
and healthy.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.